what happened in 2017 with the German Bundesbank making a strong push publicly to repatriate their gold from the New York Fed. Shortly thereafter, we saw other banks like the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Poland, Hungary, Turkey, Austria, the Czech National Bank, all of these banks doing the same thing, repatriating their gold in a period of time when no one was buying it. The following year, those same banks in 2018 bought more gold as a group than they did in the previous 60 years combined. And ironically, you look at what's happened this year, in 2022, rather, the central banks of the world have bought more gold than at any time in the last 55 years. So, that trend continues here today. But the year after 2018, 2019 is when things really started to crystallize for me, when the Bank of International Settlements reclassified gold as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset. And it became very obvious that the repatriation and the accumulation had specifically I think, ties to the BIS announcement. They were obviously, clued into what was coming. And so it started with getting the gold back in their possession, then accumulating it. And then we reclassified it as the only other Tier 1 reserve asset in the world, next to US dollars and US treasuries, and or a high liquid asset that is riskless, according to central banks. Whatever definition or name you want to call it, that's the way the central banks look at it, as a riskless asset. And it became very obvious to me at that point that it would be important or play a key role in whatever system arises from the ashes of this old system that seemed at the point, and really now seems to be nearing the end of its run, that being the US dollar, the petrodollar, the Western system. And so as we, move forward through the years, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of things that have happened. And in particular, 2020, I've started to really notice the rise of the Chinese Belt Road and Rail Initiative. Not enough people in this world really have any idea what that is, but it's about 150 countries from around the world that are involved in what China's attempt to reignite or redevelop the old Silk Road, the combination of Asia, Africa, parts of Europe and South America. And the way China does things is very different than the way the West does. The West comes in and we'll protect you. We'll provide military support, is typically the way they do things. China, that's not what they're doing. They're coming in, and instead of protecting them, they are building infrastructure. They're building roads and maritime channels and bridges and railways, and teaching them how to efficiently pull things out of the ground and economically, and then providing transport services and building the infrastructure one would need, or a country would need, to become more industrialized, to enrich the middle class, to give them a better standard of living. And it's a cooperative deal that, hey, we'll barter. You give us part of what we help you pull out of the ground, and we'll help build your infrastructure and build your middle class and build a higher standard of living. And this has really happened and permeated through many parts of the world. And we're seeing that accentuate itself here even today. We'll get to that point in a minute. But over the last couple of years, we've seen an acceleration. 2021 really woke me up the day that the United States left Afghanistan in a very unharmonious way. You can say what you want about Russia and the sticky wicket they find themselves in now in regards to the Ukraine and whatnot, but they signed a joint military cooperation agreement that day with Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. And I often ask people, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? And oftentimes people have no idea. And in my mind, it's the protection of the Saudi kingdom. And for that, the arrangement that OPEC agreed to sell oil globally in dollars. It has created a synthetic demand for the dollar since 1974, where every country on the planet Earth has had to own dollars in order to buy oil through OPEC. And so it really has been our protection of the Saudi kingdom that has given us the petrol reserve standard, because as history has shown us, in 1971, when we closed the gold window, went off the gold standard, went back on our promise to the world, where from the end of World War II until 1971, we promised the governments of the world that they could always exchange their dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And when President de Gaulle of France started to call us on that, sending warships to New York Harbor filled with dollars and demanding gold, we gave it to him, but it bled down such a precipitous portion of the gold held at the Treasury that Nixon closed the gold window. Well, it was the agreement 3 years later with Henry Kissinger and Saudi Arabia, a protection agreement, where they would agree to sell their oil in dollars. And because the dollar had been the world reserve currency since the end of World War II, backed by gold, every country on the planet owned it anyway. It just made perfect sense for it to be the petrodollar, and for that we would protect them. The fact that Russia signed this agreement the day we left Afghanistan, and there was no coincidence in that timing as we looked idiotic. Look, I'm 52 years old. The country that I grew up in, the United States, in every movie, in every commercial, in any TV show, in anything, you understood that military never left their own servicemen and women behind, ever. That was kind of the mantra. We never leave anyone behind. And the fact that we did leave our own servicemen and women behind enemy lines, and the allies from the Afghan freedom fighters left behind, was incredibly embarrassing to me as a patriot, and I think humiliating to our administration. And there was no coincidence that they made this announcement. At that point, in my mind, it was the end of the Petro Reserve status, the beginning of the end, when Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of it all, is now being protected by Russia. Well, subsequently, over the last year, things have really accelerated. And we've seen Saudi Arabia not only agree to sell their oil to China for either renminbi or the Petro Yuan bond. By the way, both are immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. But Nigeria did the same thing as well. And now we see Saudi Arabia joining the BRICS nations. It has been the privilege of the United States to live beyond our means by the good graces of our foreign creditors, and the petrodollar status that I truly do believe is coming to an end. And we are seeing a coalition of countries that are joining together against the U.S. Hegemony, against the U.S. hypocrisy. Now, you know, it's not just the U.S., it's you folks too in the U.K. and in the EU, to a specific point. The weaponizing of the dollar